Okay, hello. The long-awaited hiatus of the Eleventy weekly video updates is over, and we are now on iteration number 16. And these will be resuming on a more reliable frequency moving forward. Just a little bit of vacation in there. Yeah, so there's a lot to go through. So straight off the bat, we're just going to do a community update. And I apologize for going fast through these, but there is just a lot to do and a lot to go over. So I'll try to make this video not super long. Here we go. Zereda has a new site built with Eleventy, migrated from Gatsby. FFconf has a new site. They have a new version of their conference coming out in November of this year, so if you want to check that out. Stephanie has a new site, Modern CSS Challenges. I think there's pre-order available on this, but you can definitely sign up for email updates. I really like this site from, I don't know exactly the name of the person that made it, but marioecg.com. Really interesting infinite scroll here through their portfolio. Henry has this really cool site called Strange.website. What a cool domain. And it's basically, I think, microblogging. Really cool design. I like it. Oliver Bernotat? Super interesting site. Very cool animation to start there. I love it. Wasim has a new site built with Eleventy. Newell.art is a new site built with Eleventy. Jay Tompkins, I don't believe this is a brand new site, but I think it was new to be known as built with an Eleventy site. So yeah, check that one out. James Mitofsky just launched a new site with 3 different languages on it, which I thought was pretty cool. The Atlantic Union just put up their new site built with Eleventy. It's good to see. Phil Wolstenholme just put up a new version, or a new section on their site showcasing their different GitHub stars, which I thought was kind of cool. Sarah Sweden put up her brand new personal professional site built with Eleventy. I think this is a migration from Hugo. Tobias Watzik, new Eleventy site. Organic CSS, new Eleventy site. Dana Byerly just put up a new digital junk drawer built with Eleventy. I really like this demo of the new James Webb Space Telescope and the comparison between the previous Hubble telescope and the new James Webb telescope images. Hazel Weekly just has a new site, or at least a new implementation of the resume built with Eleventy. And I think the interesting thing about this one is that they were also generating a PDF version of this from the same Markdown file. So it's kind of like isomorphic HTML PDF combination there. Colorful Tattoo Convention, which is an event coming up in August. I guess tomorrow. An event coming up in the next couple of days, built with Eleventy. I thought this one was really interesting and really I don't think I gave it enough credit on the Twitter account, but this is the French government's version of their digital wing. Just as an example, the US has the US Digital Service and the government has gov.uk. This is the French government's version of that, RGAA version of the site. I believe that section is built with Eleventy, and it's in beta right now. Martin Tabau has a new built with Eleventy site. Red Robot Zoo, which is a new microsite from Andy Bell about their favorite music. Reindeer Games is another really great site. I love these hovers here. A blog about games. Nicholas Hoisey pointed me to this one. It's accessibility guidelines site written for Orange. And this is actually one from a couple years ago, which somehow slipped through the cracks, but Stack Overflow.design, their Stacks design pattern library is also built with Eleventy, which I thought was super cool. I wanted to go through a few folks that are talking about Eleventy or have spoken about Eleventy. Andrew Eck is speaking at Connect.js. There was a great Netlify office hours about web components and lit, which went over, at least in part, the lit SSR plugin for Eleventy, which allows you to render child content of web components using Eleventy. And I also really enjoyed this conversation between Vitaly Friedman and Stephanie Eccles. And there was some Eleventy content in there, so if you're interested in that, check it out. All right, and so we made it through the showcase portion of the community roundup. Now for the plugins and community resources section. Nils Binder put out their collection of Eleventy shortcodes, especially if you use Contentful. I think it's useful to check this out. There's a great picture shortcode here. Brian Robinson has a new video about global data files in Eleventy, so check that out. Dante has a new piece of their Learn Eleventy series on the data cascade, so check that one out. Luke Bonakorski has a new Web Mentions plugin, so they packaged up their Web Mentions code into a plugin that anyone can reuse. Simon McManus put out this blog post about using Sizzlate with Eleventy, and they have a little Eleventy Sizzlate plugin for that. And I really thought it was kind of an interesting way to mix like a bare HTML string and then modifying that string using a layout selector. So you can use a CSS selector and then inject content into the string. And that's kind of what Sizzlate does. Here's a plugin from Brian LaRue. They have an Eleventy plugin for their Enhance framework. And this is all around web components and the child content of web components. So the SSR implementations for web components. So check that out if you're interested. Fabian put out this blog post about how to inject HTML snippets into Eleventy content. So not necessarily a layout, which would allow you to sort of wrap content in a snippet at the beginning or a snippet at the end, but how to inject a snippet right into the middle of a blog post, for example. I thought that was an interesting use case. Content Train has added support for Eleventy in their starter kit. So check that out if you're in the market for a CMS. Matthias Ott put out a new Eleventy Vite starter project. It's using Vite 3.0, the new Vite 3.0 that just came out, and it was updated to use the new Eleventy Vite plugin that's using Vite 3.0. So check that out if you're interested in using Vite as your bundler. Jan Vlinis put out this tweet about a new feature in Eleventy 2.0 that basically strips the date from folders as well as file prefixes. So if you're using prefixes on your files to hardcode dates into your content, you can now do that with folders too. This tweet is specifically about grouping images and content together in the same folder, and then having Eleventy strip out that date for them. So if you want to co-locate your assets with your content, you can do that in Eleventy 2.0. Cloud Cannon has a nice guide about using Cloud Cannon to get started with Eleventy, so check that out. There was a new entry in the Eleventy Crash Course series on YouTube published, so if you're interested in that, it's about adding tags and categories to blog posts. One of the big things that I think was announced in the past month was Slinkity pushed a new version that uses Eleventy's new isLand utility for partial hydration. And it's really great to see that lower level utility being implemented upstream in the partial hydration islands architecture of Slinkity. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out the new version of Slinkity. So I did want to mention this training video that Ben Holmes put up about Eleventy's new isLand primitive. Ben is the maintainer of Slinkity, so definitely check out this video if you want to learn more about isLand and how it integrates into Slinkity specifically. Murtazali has a great blog post on Syntactl about how to add these custom anchor headings in Markdown. Another really interesting plugin that came out this week was an Eleventy rollup plugin. So this is made by Raphael Snapstromagon. Snapstromagon. It's fun to say. So if you're interested in integrating rollup with Eleventy, definitely check that out if you want to use rollup as your bundler. Stephanie Eccles published this great Eleventy plugin that allows you to add tables of content to your site to show CSS browser support. So you can kind of see it running in the example up here that she mentions. There's this neat overlay that comes in, but you can also do this table of results. So if you want to showcase browser support for CSS properties specifically, or their CSS features, you can use this Stephanie's Eleventy plugin to do that. Lit just published a new version of their Lit Labs Eleventy plugin, which allows you to do, as mentioned, SSR with Lit and Eleventy. And I think a new release of the Mermaid syntax Eleventy plugin is also available. So if you're using that, definitely update to the newest version. Michael had this kind of neat use case that they use the Figma API to feed data into their Eleventy design system. I thought that was kind of a cool use case to consume not just like JSON content from a remote API, but also to consume like actual SVG icons. I thought that was really neat. Raymond Camden has this great blog post about how they read comic books on the Jamstack. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Nicholas linked up this video from Manuel about how they use a completely separate page for accessible multi-level mobile navigation for the pre-JavaScript or no JavaScript experience. I thought that was really kind of a cool idea. All right, so we finally made it to the Eleventy core team section of this update video. There's still a lot to go through, so you might see me looking differently halfway through this section because I'm going to record the rest on the next workday. We did publish a new version of the Eleventy syntax highlighter plugin that allows you deeper control over the attributes that go into your pre and code elements. So you can add classes to each of those if you want. We also added aliases for NJK and nunjucks. So I think in a previous video we had mentioned that you got to use Jinja 2 for nunjuck syntax highlighting, and now we do have formal aliases for those in the plugin. So as mentioned in the community roundup, we did release a new version of the Eleventy Vite plugin, Eleventy plugin Vite, that uses the brand new Vite 3.0. So if you're interested in that, check it out. I did want to mention this was kind of up for discussion. So right now in Eleventy specifically, the tags property in your data cascade, which feeds into collections, is not case sensitive. We don't deduplicate those based on the string case. So if you're interested in that changing, or if you have a strong opinion on that, I would weigh in on this issue. Because I think a good case can be made that we should have those be case insensitive. So if you're a fan of that or not a fan of that, definitely leave your opinion on issue 2462. I did want to mention that we did close an issue about reducing the size of the dependency graph. I think we can formally conclude this when it was opened about 2 years ago. And as you can see, we're kind of trending down. So we had over 474 on Eleventy 0.7. And then Eleventy 1.0, we had about 300 dependencies. And on Eleventy 2.0, we have about 192. So I think we can probably keep going in that trend and keep it going down. Yeah, we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of versions. We published a new version of the Eleventy Leaderboards. Congratulations to the winners there. I think we went through that on Twitter quite a bit. And I will be doing another Leaderboards version here next week. So look for that. Look for number 21. There's a lot of discussion between this video and the last weekly video that was published about opt-in of the meta generator tag, and we did actually make a video about this. So it kind of spawned from this excellent blog post from David Darns, trying to really encourage folks to add it. And we made a formal video about why we do require that to opt in, so you can check that out if you want. And in that same vein, Wapalizer, which is kind of this tool that analyzes websites to see what they're built with, does now also support the new meta generator tag for Eleventy specifically. There was kind of a long-standing issue with TOML syntax parsing on Windows, and we had some examples of using TOML in your front matter, because we do allow you to customize the format of your front matter. You can use YAML, you can use JavaScript, you can use TOML, you can use JSON. And the example that we had on the documentation was using a package on NPM that was just TOML. It was just called TOML. And it had a bug with it in Windows, so it wasn't great on Windows. So on our documentation, I've updated to use a different package, and which doesn't have the Windows bug. So that should simplify the docs a little bit in terms of customizing your front matter to use TOML. All right, so I look different now. I'm wearing different clothes. I didn't finish the video at the end of the day, and so now I'm starting it back up in the morning. So here we go. Yeah, so we did actually a couple of Canary releases of Eleventy Core. Most of the work in the past couple weeks has been surrounding the internationalization plugin. So we actually have two different internationalization pages on our documentation. We have a sort of tips and tricks, best practices page in our working with templates section, and we also have a separate section for our new internationalization plugin. I would recommend reading through the best practices page first, but they work well together. And this page kind of goes through how to organize your files inside of your project and what the best ways are to do that in Eleventy, especially to leverage the data cascade. And I really think the best way to do that, and I think the most popular way to do that with the Twitter polling, the very scientific Twitter polling that I've done on this, is that you want to create separate folders for all of your different pieces of content and store the different localized content in those separate folders. You can store the language code as a file extension suffix. I don't really feel like that's the best way to do it because you don't really get any benefit out of the data cascade there. But you can do that. And we kind of go through on this page the different pros and cons of those different URL styles, whether or not you're putting the language code in your URL explicitly or whether those are implied. And you do content negotiation, so which is just a fancy way of saying that the server selects what file to serve based on language headers that get sent from the web browser. So I won't go through this too much because it's a little bit content heavy, but I would recommend folks read it. And I did actually include a bunch of different recipes for your redirects file or your Netlify TOML to implement these different URL strategies in your projects. So if you want to do content negotiation on all your pages, you can do that. If you want to have distinct URLs, so basically all of your languages are URL addressable, the language codes are in the URLs. I've noticed that some projects do content negotiation on the homepage only, which I think is an interesting way to solve the performance problem of visiting the homepage and not having to redirect to another URL right away. And then another one I think that will be popular for folks that are going to have primarily content in one language, and localized content is kind of going to be an exception for a lot of their content. In this example, you have the default language is not encoded in the URL. The default language code is not in the URL, but your non-primary or non-default languages do have a language code on them. So just another way to mix projects. I feel like a lot of projects, you're going to have to select what is the best strategy for your specific project. And I don't think that you can say one size fits all. Different projects are going to have different requirements. And that's why we kind of have different recipes for all of these different versions. So in Canary 13, we have this new internationalization plugin. We don't really take a stance on dictionary functionality. So if you want to localize strings or store localized strings in your project, there are a bunch of different good framework agnostic solutions available for that. And we kind of list them here at the top. But to add the Eleventy internationalization plugin and to see how it works, we'll kind of go through that right now. It works the same as any other bundled core plugin. You import it from the Eleventy package and then add it using the Add Plugin API. Now, we do have a required option of default language, and we do not have a default value here. Eleventy doesn't want to take a stance on what the default language of Eleventy projects should be, so this is actually empty by default. If you do not specify this option, we'll throw an error for you. But a lot of my projects are going to use EN or EN-US. If you want to see the full list of options here, you can expand that to see those options. I'm not going to go through them here. When you do add the internationalization plugin to your projects, we add a new data variable into the page object. So page.lang, that will store the current page's language code. And kind of the bulk of the work here is exposed as two different universal filters. So first up, we have the locale filter. It accepts an URL string and transforms it to the current page's locale. So this is when you want to link to content, but you're not sure if you have a localized version of it or not. And so this will fall back to the default language if a localized version doesn't exist. So just as an example, when you have a template inside of our EN folder here, our English language templates, and we want to localize that URL, we just pass it the /blog URL, pass it to the locale filter, and then because we're inside of this EN folder, we'll get en/blog back. If we're in ES, so Spanish language templates, and we pass /blog into locale URL, we'll get ES blog back. If the templates exist that publish to that. If the templates do not exist to link to this /blog page, you'll get the default language URL back. So it is important to note that the filter checks for existence of files that publish to this URL. So if you don't have a page in your project that publishes to /blog, you'll get the default language back, or an error will be thrown, and you can configure that using the error mode option of the plugin, and that's in the advanced options above. And you can also pass in an override to the language code as well, if you'd like to force it. The other filter that we publish here is the locale links filter. This is used to populate language chooser menus. So you have a piece of content, you want to link to the other localized versions of that content, you can do so using locale links. So you want to pass in page.url here, and you'll call the locale links filter, and you'll actually get an array back of all the localized versions of that content, not including the current page. So this allows you to link to, you can create menus or lists on your page that link to the other localized version of the content. So just as an example, this page is also available in Spanish. So when you have localized content on your page, you can also link to it using the link attribute, so link rel alternate, for the other localized versions of the content on the page. So this is like the formal way to do that. And this creates a few niceties in search engines. So you'll want to do this for any pages that you have available localized as well. And here's just a quick example that shows how to do that. The other thing I want to mention with the internationalization plugin is that it does modify the core get previous collection item and get next collection item filters. One of the wrinkles about internationalized and localized content is that when you're dealing with collections, you don't want every localized version of that content to exist inside of your collections, because a lot of that content is going to be duplicated. And so what we'll actually do is modify the content of these filters, modify the content of these collections to prefer localized content. So if you're on a Spanish language page and you want to reference a collection, you can actually do that with these built-in get previous and get next collection item filters, and we'll prefer localized content links in those collections. So I know that's a little bit complicated, but basically the gist of it is that the get collection item filters will prefer localized content. So you shouldn't really have to do anything to get, you shouldn't have to modify your application code to get the localized content back in collections. So in the same vein, I did do a bunch of work to upgrade the Eleventy-base-blog using this new internationalization plugin. So when we do our full 2.0 release, I'll probably flip the switch to make the i18n, or the localized version of this Eleventy-base-blog project, the default. And the reason I think that is good is that we are making internationalization an opt-in. So all the URLs that are published by this project are using that last URL strategy that I mentioned, which doesn't have the default language code encoded in the URL, and instead adds secondary languages as another feature on top of your project. For most projects, it's going to operate the exact same way, and they won't see any changes because you don't have any language codes encoded in your URLs. But if you do decide to add localized versions of your content later, you can do that without breaking any existing URLs, which I think is nice. A couple of great blog posts that came out specifically around internationalization and localization. I really enjoyed this one from Raphael, who's been on a tear in the last month. I would recommend checking out this internationalization of URLs blog post that Raphael put up. I think it's really good. And really a titan in the Eleventy internationalization space. Worked on ChromeOS.dev is Snugug, Sam Richard. He published a plugin of internationalization helpers. I really think those are worth checking out. Some really nice things in there. So moving on from internationalization, I do want to mention that I did put up this blog post. Eleventy is kind of doing some more competitive analysis stuff, really trying to highlight the unique features that Eleventy has. And I did some benchmarks on which generator builds Markdown the fastest. So if you're interested in that, maybe check it out. I will say that Hugo is still blazingly fast, a really great generator. But if you're looking for a fast generator that is using JavaScript and is maybe more familiar to you as a JavaScript project, I think Eleventy is a really great, very competitive alternative to Hugo in that space. So another thing that we added is another option. This was a great PR that came in from, I believe, Raphael, to add the get created date option. This is different from get last modified. It does resolve to the file's first git commit. These get related date options are a little bit slower, so I would maybe limit it to your CI server environment. So if you're doing it on Netlify deploy, you can opt in only to use get created in those modes. And we have some links to some examples of how to do that. And one of the last things we added here, just at the end of the week, last week, we added a logo cloud to eleventy.dev. Hopefully convince folks that Eleventy is a very production ready, very mature project that is trusted by a lot of big names. And putting this together has been kind of surreal in that way too, because I had forgotten some of these